The chamber fell silent. Nigel Farage rose to his feet, and what he said next would send shockwaves through the corridors of power that would be felt for weeks to come. Keir Starmer's face went pale, the opposition benches erupted, and in that moment, British politics changed forever. What happened in those crucial minutes has left the nation divided, the media in frenzy, and the government scrambling for answers. This is the story of how one man triggered a constitutional crisis that nobody saw coming. It started like any other Wednesday afternoon in Westminster. The House of Commons was preparing for Prime Minister's questions, MPS were filing into the chamber, and the usual political theatre was about to begin. But beneath the surface, something was brewing. Nigel Farage had been unusually quiet for the past 3 days. No tweets, no media appearances, no inflammatory statements. And anyone who knows Farage understands that when he goes silent, he's planning something big. The session began normally enough. Starmer fielded questions about the economy, dodged queries about his latest policy U-turn, and delivered his trademark rehearsed responses with that familiar air of controlled composure. The Labour benches were confident. The Prime Minister seemed relaxed. Everything appeared to be business as usual, but then the Speaker called Farage's name and the atmosphere in the chamber shifted instantly. Farage stood up slowly, deliberately, holding a stack of papers in his hand. The murmuring stopped. Even the most seasoned political journalists in the press gallery leaned forward. They knew this posture. They recognised that look in his eye. This wasn't going to be a routine question. This was going to be an ambush. And Starmer, despite all his legal training and political experience, had no idea what was coming. The Reform UK leader began speaking, and his opening words cut through the chamber like a knife. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't grandstanding. His voice was calm, measured, and absolutely devastating. He referenced documents that shouldn't have been public. He quoted from internal government communications. He laid out a timeline that connected decisions made months ago to consequences that were only now becoming apparent. And with each sentence, the colour drained further from Starmer's face. What Farage revealed was explosive. He produced evidence suggesting that the government had known about a major policy failure weeks before it became public knowledge. He presented communications showing that ministers had been warned repeatedly about the potential consequences of their decisions. Yet they proceeded anyway. He named dates, times, and specific individuals who had raised red flags that were systematically ignored. The opposition benches were stunned into silence. The government benches looked like they'd been hit by a freight train. But Farage wasn't finished. He then did something unprecedented. He invoked a rarely used parliamentary procedure to call for an emergency debate under Standing Order number 24. This mechanism allows an MP to request an immediate debate on a matter of urgent public importance. It's almost never granted, but when it is, it means the issue is considered so critical that normal parliamentary business must be suspended. The entire chamber knew what this meant. Farage wasn't just asking a question, he was throwing down the gauntlet. The Speaker's decision came swiftly, the request was granted. An emergency debate would take place that very evening. The news spread through Westminster like wildfire. Journalists started frantically typing. Opposition MPS huddled in urgent discussions. Government ministers rushed out of the chamber to coordinate their response. Within minutes, the story was breaking on every major news channel. Social media exploded. The political establishment was in complete chaos. Starmer had exactly 4 hours to prepare his response, 4 hours to assemble a defence against allegations that could potentially bring down his government. His team went into crisis mode. Legal advisors were summoned. Communication strategists started crafting rebuttals. Coalition partners were called for emergency consultations. But the problem was clear. Farage had the documents, he had the evidence, and most dangerously, he had the momentum. As the afternoon wore on, Mowry details began emerging. Whistleblowers started coming forward. Additional documents were leaked to the press. What had started as a single accusation was rapidly snowballing into a full-blown scandal. The opposition smelled blood in the water. Even some of Starmer's own backbenchers were privately expressing concern. The political calculus was shifting by the minute, and everyone in Westminster knew that the emergency debate that evening would be absolutely crucial. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media platforms were flooded with opinions, theories, and demands for answers. Hashtags related to the scandal were trending worldwide within an hour. News channels cleared their schedules to provide continuous coverage. Political analysts were being wheeled out to provide commentary on what this meant for the government's future. The consensus was clear. This was big. This was potentially government ending. And it was all unfolding in real time. By early evening, the atmosphere around Parliament was electric. Protesters had gathered outside, both supporting and opposing the government. Security was heightened. The press gallery was packed beyond capacity. Every seat in the public viewing area was filled. MPs from all parties were present, knowing that what was about to happen could define this parliamentary term. The emergency debate was scheduled to begin at 7 o'clock. Farage would open, Starmer would respond, and the nation would be watching. The chamber was absolutely packed when the emergency debate began. Every seat was occupied. MPs were standing in the aisles. The tension was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The Speaker called the session to order, and the traditional rowdiness of Parliament gave way to an eerie, forced silence. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't political posturing. This was deadly serious, and everyone in that room knew it. History was being made, and nobody wanted to miss a single word. Farage rose to open the debate, and his demeanour was completely different from earlier. Gone was the calm, measured tone. Now he was in full combat mode, and he came out swinging. He began by laying out the timeline in excruciating detail. February 12th, the first warning memo. March 7th, the second urgent communication. April 23rd, the direct briefing to ministerial staff. Each date was accompanied by specific documentation projected onto screens for all to see. He wasn't making vague accusations. He was presenting a prosecutorial case. The evidence was damning. Internal emails showed civil servants expressing grave concerns about a particular policy direction. Minutes from meetings revealed that these concerns were acknowledged but ultimately dismissed. Most devastatingly, there were communications suggesting that the political considerations outweighed the practical warnings. The implication was clear: the government had prioritised political optics over sound governance, and the consequences of that decision were now becoming apparent to the public. But Farage's masterstroke came when he revealed his source, or rather, sources. Multiple civil servants acting on conscience had come forward independently with overlapping information. This wasn't a single disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. This was a coordinated effort by people inside the system who believed the public deserved to know the truth. The credibility of the allegations multiplied instantly. Even the most loyal government supporters couldn't dismiss this as a political hit job. The opposition benches were energised. Conservative MPs were nodding in agreement. Liberal Democrat members were taking furious notes. Even some Labour backbenchers looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the evidence mounted. Farage spoke for nearly 40 minutes, systematically dismantling the government's credibility on this issue. By the time he concluded his opening remarks, the political landscape had shifted. The question was no longer whether mistakes had been made, but whether the government could survive admitting to them. Then came Starmer's turn, and every eye in the chamber turned to the Prime Minister. He walked to the dispatch box with the weight of his political career resting on his shoulders. His opening was defensive, immediately questioning the motives behind the leak and the timing of Farage's revelation. But the chamber wasn't having it. Shouts of "answer the question" and "address the evidence" came from multiple directions. The Speaker had to call for order repeatedly. Starmer was clearly rattled, and it showed. What happened next shocked everyone. Instead of offering a full-throated defence, Starmer pivoted. He acknowledged that mistakes had been made. He admitted that warnings had been received and perhaps not given sufficient weight. He promised a full internal review and accepted that lessons needed to be learned. On the surface, this seemed like a reasonable response, but politically it was a disaster. By admitting fault, he had validated Farage's entire argument. The opposition erupted. Government MPs sat in stunned silence. But then Starmer did something unexpected. He went on the offensive. He turned the tables by questioning why these civil servants had chosen to leak to Farage rather than use proper whistleblowing channels. He suggested that there might be political motivations at play. He pointed out that Farage himself had a history of playing fast and loose with facts when it suited his narrative. He demanded to know how these supposedly confidential documents had made their way into Farage's hands and whether any laws had been broken in the process. The chamber exploded. Government MPs found their voice again, cheering Starmer's counterattack. Opposition members shouted in outrage. The Speaker struggled to maintain order as the debate descended into chaos. Farage was on his feet, demanding a right of reply. Conservative MPs were yelling questions. The press gallery was in a frenzy, reporters frantically updating their stories in real time. What had started as a one-sided prosecution was now a genuine political brawl. Farage got his right of reply and he was furious. He accused Starmer of shooting the messenger rather than addressing the message. He pointed out that whistleblowers often have to go outside normal channels precisely because those channels are controlled by the very people they're trying to expose. He reminded the chamber that governments always attack the credibility of their accusers when they can't refute the accusations themselves. The exchange became increasingly heated, increasingly personal and increasingly riveting. Other MPs joined the fray. Senior Conservatives piled on, seeing an opportunity to wound the government. Liberal Democrats called for resignations. Scottish National Party members demanded a full independent inquiry. Even some Labour MPs asked difficult questions, careful to frame them as constructive rather than rebellious, but questions nonetheless. The debate was supposed to last 3 hours. It went on for nearly 5, with the Speaker extending the time repeatedly due to the number of members wanting to contribute. The substance of the accusations began to emerge more clearly through the debate. It appeared to involve a major infrastructure project that had been rushed through despite engineering concerns. Costs had been underestimated, timelines had been unrealistic, and expert advice had been ignored in favour of hitting a political deadline. Now the project was massively over budget, significantly delayed, and the public was starting to ask questions. The government had tried to bury the bad news, but the whistleblowers had other ideas. As midnight approached, the debate finally wound down. No vote was scheduled. This was purely about accountability and public record. But the political damage was done. Starmer had survived the immediate threat. His admission of mistakes had taken some of the wind out of Farage's sails, but at a tremendous cost. His authority was diminished. His judgment was questioned. His government looked vulnerable in a way it hadn't before, and Farage had positioned himself as the champion of transparency and accountability, a role he would milk for all it was worth. The morning after the emergency debate, the newspaper front pages told the story. "Starmer under siege," screamed one headline. "Government in crisis mode," declared another. "Farage's parliamentary coup," proclaimed a third. The political commentators were unanimous. Regardless of who had won the debate on points, the Prime Minister had suffered serious damage. Trust once lost is incredibly difficult to regain, and Starmer had admitted to failures that would haunt him for months to come. Within the Labour Party, the recriminations began immediately. Backbenchers were furious that they'd been blindsided. They demanded to know why they weren't briefed about the potential scandal before Farage revealed it publicly. Senior ministers started pointing fingers at each other, trying to establish who had dropped the ball. The party's internal communications were leaked to the press, showing a level of dysfunction and panic that belied the calm exterior they were trying to project publicly. The opposition parties smelled opportunity. The Conservatives immediately tabled a motion of no confidence in the government. While it had little chance of passing given Labour's parliamentary majority, it kept the pressure on and forced Labour MPs to publicly defend a wounded administration. The Liberal Democrats called for the resignation of specific ministers connected to the failed project. Reform UK, capitalising on Farage's moment in the spotlight, saw their polling numbers jump 3 points overnight, but the real impact was felt in public opinion. Trust in the government, already fragile after a difficult first year in office, took a significant hit. Polling conducted in the days following the debate showed that 68% of respondents believed the government had deliberately misled the public about the project's problems. 72% wanted a full independent inquiry, and most worryingly for Labour, their lead over the Conservatives had shrunk to just 4 points, the narrowest margin since the election. Starmer attempted damage control. He announced the independent inquiry that the public was demanding. headed by a retired senior civil servant with a reputation for integrity. He promised full cooperation and transparency. He reshuffled minor ministerial positions to show he was taking action. But these moves were widely seen as reactive rather than proactive, responses to pressure rather than genuine leadership. The narrative had been set and Starmer was struggling to change it. Farage, meanwhile, was everywhere. He gave interviews to every media outlet that would have him. He wrote op-eds for major newspapers. He addressed rallies where he was treated like a conquering hero. He framed himself as the only politician willing to stand up to the establishment and demand answers on behalf of ordinary people. His message was simple and effective. The old parties are corrupt and self-serving. Only Reform UK is willing to challenge them. And the voters were listening. The political consequences extended beyond just the immediate scandal. Other journalists, emboldened by Farage's success, started digging into other government projects and decisions. More stories emerged of cost overruns, missed deadlines and ignored warnings. Each new revelation reinforced the narrative of a government that wasn't competent to manage the country's affairs. What had started as a single scandal was metastasizing into a broader crisis of confidence. Within Parliament, the dynamics shifted noticeably. Government MPs became more rebellious, more willing to voice concerns publicly. Coalition partners started making demands and threatening to withdraw support unless their priorities were addressed. The opposition became more aggressive, seeing weakness and moving to exploit it. Parliamentary votes that should have been routine became nail-biters. Starmer's authority to command his party was clearly diminished. The international reaction added another dimension to the crisis. Foreign investors expressed concern about the political stability of the UK. International partners questioned whether the British government could be relied upon to deliver on its commitments. The pound weakened slightly against major currencies. While not catastrophic, these reactions created additional pressure on an already embattled administration. Economic confidence, so crucial for any government's success, was being undermined by political chaos. 3 weeks after the emergency debate, the independent inquiry delivered its preliminary findings. They were brutal. The report confirmed that multiple warnings had been ignored. It documented a pattern of political considerations overriding expert advice. It identified specific decision points where different choices could have avoided the current disaster. Most damningly, it suggested that information had been withheld from Parliament, potentially constituting a breach of ministerial code. The findings vindicated everything Farage had alleged. Starmer was forced to make a statement to Parliament. He apologised unreservedly. He accepted full responsibility for the failures. He announced that 2 junior ministers would resign, though conspicuously no senior cabinet members were asked to fall on their swords. He outlined reforms to ensure such failures wouldn't happen again. But the apology felt hollow. The resignations felt insufficient. The reforms felt like window dressing. The political damage was profound and lasting. The final twist came when it emerged that Farage had known about the scandal for over a month before revealing it. He had deliberately waited, gathering more evidence, building his case, choosing the perfect moment to strike for maximum impact. This revelation infuriated the government, who accused him of playing politics with serious issues, but it also impressed political observers who recognised the strategic brilliance of his approach. Farage had demonstrated that he wasn't just a protest politician. He was a serious operator who could outmaneuver establishment figures.